Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Let's talk about Vesta, one of the most mysterious goddesses out of all the goddesses. There are many, many goddesses, depending on which, culture you sort of look into. But we're dealing today with Vesta, which emanates through the Roman and Greek stories, mythologies, cultures, and so forth. At the moment, Vesta is at about 23 degrees of Virgo. And first of all, just a little bit of background on Vesta for those that may not be familiar with her. For those of you that are, this will just be a good little revision. Vesta, which is the Roman name, the Greek name is Hestia, so they are the same goddess, just in the same way we have Venus, Aphrodite, the Roman and the Greek names, etc. She was born, her father was Kronos and her mother was Rhea, and she was one of the first born, actually. And then she was one of the last to be reborn, meaning that Kronos, Saturn, in one aspect of mythologies connecting to Saturn or Kronos, he swallowed all his children. And when his children were freed because of Zeus, Jupiter, Vesta was the last one to come out. And I've often made reference to that because it's a very important esoteric and symbolic meaning to the vibrational frequency of Vesta and what she reflects, meaning that she spent the longest time ingested inside, in the inner realms, in other words, in the soul realms. And even in art, when you try to sort of research photos of Vesta, there's hardly any material around, and that's not a coincidence, that's not some random thing either. She's just such a mystical and private goddess, and one of the most complex goddesses, and probably one of the most difficult to understand. And so for those who have her in a prominent position in their birth chart, I really, really encourage you to explore a journey, a personal journey with understanding what Vesta is all about, because it can be just a very powerful tool in your journey in unlocking a lot of unconscious, subconscious projections and material that could be presenting, sort of very difficult and challenging things in life when it comes to relationships and sexuality and sexual energy. And so let's sort of back up here and start right from way, way, way back in the original traditional zodiac, deriving from the Babylonian times, where the zodiac sign of Libra did not exist in the way that we know it today. If you go back to the original zodiac, where Libra is situated, which is the 7th house, which is in between Virgo and Scorpio, that point there in the zodiac was basically, it connected to Scorpio. Where Libra sits today is where the claws, let me just read it to you to be very precise. So let me see, where is that part mentioned? Okay, so in the original zodiacal belt outlined by the Assyrian and Babylonian cultures, Scorpio was symbolized by a serpent and directly followed by the sign Virgo. what is today called Libra was contained within the constellation Scorpio and was designated as the chele, the claws of the scorpion. The Virgo and Scorpio glyphs were similar in design, and most of you would be aware of that when you look at the Virgo and Scorpio glyph. They're both an M. The letter of the alphabet M is what it looks like, right? With a little line drawn through, and so the M stands for matter, mother, and with the Virgo glyph, the M was turned inward. The line, as you look at the Virgo of glyph, you can see that the line sort of turns within the M of matter, right? And the Scorpio glyph, the line turns outward. This is a very significant point because Vesta, in the work of Demetra George, she ascribes both Virgo and Scorpio as being not necessarily the rulers of Virgo, but the two signs that really, you could say rulership, but the two signs that really reflect and correspond to this archetypal goddess Vesta, and just the different facets of what she represented, who she was in mythology, and how she lived her life, and the Vestal virgins that were with her, and what they did, and what was represented by what they did, and so forth, can all be drawn out of the archetypes of Virgo and Scorpio. And so, in short, it corresponds to spirituality, Virgo, and sexuality, Scorpio. And so, we're talking of we're talking about a time that was, a very, very long time ago. Like, according to Jeffrey Wolf Green, it's around about 6,000 years ago, where the line sort of eventually was drawn relative to the matriarchal eventually sort of transitioning into the patriarchal. Okay, so we've been under patriarchal systems for around about 6,000 years, essentially. And so when you go back to the myth of Vesta, you can literally see when you read the mythology and the history around that period where the matriarchal was transitioned into the patriarchal, which is, by the way, when the zodiac sign of Libra was implemented into the zodiac, the tropical sort of zodiac, if you like, that we work with, the 12 zodiac signs that will, so that the sign of Libra came into effect when the patriarchal way of life, if you like, transitioned, right, from the matriarchal. And what does Libra represent? It basically was brought into, for various reasons, but the most obvious being the symbol of marriage, right? And that within itself essentially created the split between female sexuality, the female feminine archetype, as having to have to be either a virgin or not. So in the matriarchal times, in Vesta's time, she was a sexual healer, if you like, if we want to use just modern terms. And she was totally free, independent, and autonomous. She did not stay with one person, and she was never going to marry any one particular person or god, right? Even though it was they tried to force her to do that. And one of the gods they wanted her to marry, two of them, I think one was Poseidon, one was Apollo, and she refused. She didn't want to. So thus the power of Vesta is the principle of dedication, devotion, and focus in oneself. The fact that she's been transiting in the sign of Virgo actually since I think it was October 2020, and from October 2020, she's well, she's actually formed. It just occurred to me today, because the main thing that I was focused on was her opposition to Neptune, because I think that's a really important transit, particularly because Virgo relative to Vesta, relative to the matriarchal times, is so much about our own inner spiritual focus and alignment and integration. And so here we have her in her own sign, as it were, Virgo, since October last year, and she's still there at the moment, and forming an opposition to Neptune. And oppositions always essentially bring about the experience of being able to see more clearly. The oppositions basically promote awareness. They may initially be presented as something that's been projected, because it's a polarity point, right? So it's two positions. A polarity is always two positions, right? Exactly opposite each other. And so oppositions will stimulate that process of projecting something outside of ourselves. And then ultimately, what we need to come to understand relative to those energies is, how do we integrate this energy back into ourself, so that we become more whole, as it were, so that we can become more integrated. And that's, partly why this whole concept of projection exists. It's because we are so out of touch with something within ourselves, and the only way we can experience it is by projecting it outside of ourselves. And if we have enough awareness, or integrate enough awareness through this process, we can then reintegrate. We bring that energy back into ourselves. And this is a very strong point emphasized with Vesta at the moment, being opposite Neptune, showing us our spiritual integration and how integrated or not we are, and where we further need to improve on these levels, and where we further need to kind of clean up our life, as it were. Even things like, just our day-to-day sort of activities, we can bring it down to the absolute mundane and basics, and then we can take it deeply into the most private, deepest components of our own inner worlds and our etheric body as well, because Vesta corresponds to what is known as the Kundalini energy, which is her sexual fire energy. And the Kundalini energy connects to the etheric body, right, which is an aspect of our beingness that is very close to our physical body, and virtually acts as a bridge to the other dimensions, the higher dimensions, the spiritual dimensions. So the etheric body is primary in our field of experience, right? And so Vesta and her sexual fire, sexual energy, Kundalini energy resides in that field, if you like. So, yeah, I was just saying that even with, because she's in the transiting through Virgo, and Virgo, it's so fascinating to me that, first of all, she corresponds to being most closely associated to Virgo and Scorpio in terms of what she signifies. And those two signs of the zodiac are two of the most complex signs of the entire zodiac. And hence why, when you read material on Vesta, when you read what I might like to call deep sort of research and historical and mythological material by good writers, you'll find that there's a lot of reference to her as being one of the most complex, most mystical, and most unknown goddesses. So it's not a coincidence that, she connects to Virgo and Scorpio as being, they are, as I've said many times, they are two of the most complex signs of the zodiac. And both of them hold an aspect of what they represent, which is very internal and inner. There's so much work or workings going on within the archetypes of Scorpio and Virgo. And one is water and one is earth. And certainly both water and earth have very much to do with the inner planes and the physicality of the body as well. The transformations, the work around that, the healing around that, the taking care of ourselves in those ways, right? And in Virgo as well, just pointing to our daily sort of practices and rituals. I mean, for example, I'm one of those people that if my house is not in order, it's not clean and it's not tidy, psychologically and spiritually and emotionally, that just does my head in. It really just plays on me. I can't relax if my house isn't in order. So I am one of those people that has most things in order, and certainly everything is clean all the time. In fact, my house isn't even ever messy. I'm one of those people that generally, 99.9%, I won't go to sleep unless the dishes have been done. Now, you can view that however you like. It's fine, but I'm just expressing that is a part of me. Now, Vesta is very, very strong in my chart, and I guess she's being highly activated at the moment because she's in my own chart at the moment. She's forming a trine to herself. I've got Vesta in Capricorn in the 12th house, conjunct my Mars. A very, very close conjunction between Vesta and my Mars. And in the 12th house, it has a lot of past life implications. It has a lot of unconscious implications. And it also has a lot of implications relative to my own sexuality, sexual energy, and the men and relationships that I've had in my life, and all the complexities around those experiences. So in other words, I resonate with the goddess Vesta very, very strongly. I feel incredibly embodied with her, and in very mystical and private ways, because she's in my 12th house, so she's hidden. I don't talk about her from the point of view of publicly, speaking about all the details and experiences around that. I'm just drawing a reference point to illustrate that I actually have a very personal experience with the goddess that I'm talking about today. So a lot of what I'm sharing is not just literature, things I've read. A lot of it is, but most of it actually comes from my own personal experience and observations through the years as well. And at the moment, as I said, she's forming a trine to my natal Vesta, which activates a grand trine in my chart with Saturn and Pluto. And at the moment, as I said, transiting Vesta is opposite Neptune. This is the third opposition. Is it the third one? Let me just... Yes, it's the third opposition, okay, to Neptune. Her first one, the first opposition with Neptune was around 9th of February. Or rather, the first one was in December of 2020, and the second one was in February, and the last one being the third hit has occurred just a couple of days ago. So it's the final journey of Vesta and Neptune. And so I'd like to hear from all of you if you are aware of Vesta and if you have been following this transit, or even if you now, after hearing what I'm sharing today, if you want to go back and just have a think about what Vesta opposite Neptune has activated for you from the point of view of your spiritual integrative work. Remember that Vesta, because she's such a she basically corresponds to focus, right? She's the principle of focus. That focus becomes a focus that's unlike anything else in your life. It's a real Scorpio type of focus, and again, there's no coincidence that she rules Scorpio, right? And Virgo as well, as I said. So the focus is so intense because it excludes everything else. And when you think about that, when you sit down and focus on just one thing, doesn't matter what it is, just one thing, have your undivided attention to just one thing, and everything else is excluded for that time. Imagine the power that's generated, right, in that focus, because nothing else is coming inside, nothing else is interfering, nothing else is taking your energy, focus, or attention away, because you've just basically pointed all that energy and focus into just the one thing. And that's what Vesta actually stimulates. Now, part of the reason or understanding about why she does that, where that comes from, it's very much around connected to her mythology, her story of being her myth is very complex and there's many layers to it, and I can't uncover it all here today. But one thing to know is that she was a goddess who used her sexual energy to heal people. In that process, she, by not staying with one person and by not ever marrying anybody, she remained a virgin unto herself. She remained committed and dedicated and focused to herself. So when she went out there, as it were, and engaged in activities through her sexual energy for the purposes of healing, after some time, what she would have to do, as it were, is withdraw back into herself in order to reintegrate with her own energy. So a transit from Vesta, in other words, that's hitting off something important in your chart, could very much be pointing to a time in your life where you've been so busy out there in the world in some kind of way, whether that's through your work or your personal relationships, giving a lot of your time and energy and focus to other things outside of yourself and or to other people. And now coming to a time where you need to actually withdraw from all of that to a large extent so that you can reintegrate back into yourself and refocus the energy back onto yourself. That's a very important point that would reflect to you some themes around what Vesta may be highlighting for you, right, while she's transiting in Virgo. By the way, I don't know if you guys know, but she's not one of the largest asteroids. There's much larger asteroids than her. But the most fascinating thing is that she's the only asteroid that can be seen with the naked eye. Now, this is a very fascinating phenomena because that tells us that even astronomically, she is the substance of what she's made of is so incredibly luminous that we can, as humans, from the position of Earth, we can look into the heavens and, in a nighttime sky, and we can actually see her. And remember that she corresponds to the sacred flame. And in fact, her, what was it? Let me think. It's the Sanskrit word for I hate the sound of those motorbikes. I'm sure you guys hate it too, and I apologize, but I can't tell them not to ride past my residence. Okay, anyway, basically, she also corresponds to a Sanskrit root meaning, which means shining. So her name actually means the shining one, right? That's why she also corresponds to, the fire, the flame, right? So she's this light. She's this incredible fire, light, shining sort of energy, if you like, that resides within us. It's a very, very powerful force. Now, with the whole sexual complexities and with the whole transition from the matriarch into the patriarchal systems, and with that transition came this whole period in history where Vesta and the Vestal virgins were essentially brutally punished if they performed the sexual activities that they previously did. So there was this whole level of restrainment, denial, suppression. They were made to feel, the matters of shame and guilt that come up very strongly in people's psyche around sexuality correspond to Vesta. They do also correspond to Lilith. I find that very interesting, actually, because goddess Lilith also brings up matters of shame, being shamed, for expressing your autonomy and freedom. Think about it. We have the patriarchal systems kicking in where there's this division suddenly made where a woman is either this or either that. The woman can't be both. And that's a very important complex psychological dilemma that exists both in men and women, actually. So Vesta is just not important for women. It's just as equally important for men. Men can be Vesta type of individuals in their lives. Now, there's the whole sexual component, as I said, which, because of the transitions from matriarch to patriarch and the punishment subsequently that was brought about in order to create the suppression and the division and so forth, as the imprint of that occurred into humanity, if you like, that ultimately became these distortions about the feminine and the masculine and the sexual energy within all of us, and the guilt and the shame and the repression and suppression and projection, all those things that we've learned to understand through the psychological work, the field of psychology that has brought so much understanding into human behavior. But in my personal opinion, through the work of astrology and having an understanding of human psychology, there's not much more that's going to be more clear or powerful relative to understanding the various dynamics that exist in human nature, in human beings. And so because of this whole sexual complexity and the transitions and the imprints and so forth, one of the themes that can come up very strongly in Vesta types is there's a few sort of layers in this spectrum, but the two most opposing points on this spectrum, one would be the suppression of one's sexual energy and sexuality, where it subsequently can create experiences where a person becomes impotent because the sexual energy is blocked, where an individual is just not comfortable with sexual exchange, intimacy, and so forth. That's a distorted aspect, if you like, of the Vesta energy. And the opposite sort of version to the same thing would be the focus of sexual energy for the purposes of spiritual illumination. So that would perhaps be a person who takes on a life path of being celibate, for instance. They are channeling the sexual energy into that particular pathway. So it just depends who you are and how much consciousness and awareness is in what you are doing and why. The opposite extreme on the other end of the spectrum regarding Vesta types has got to do with what is defined as being promiscuous or prostitution. You'll often see the archetype of Virgo and Vesta quite prominent in individuals who explore that particular journey in life, meaning prostitution or promiscuity. Okay. So I like to talk about Vesta because I think there are still a lot of people on the planet that are caught into a bit of a trap of a paradigm that is defined by patriarchal systems that has created so much oppression and suppression in people's liberties and autonomy and freedom to express themselves. And so there's this deep psychological imprint about all of this, which, as I said before, brings up feelings of guilt. It also brings up memories. So someone who has a strong Vesta, because of the punishment that was subsequently incurred by the patriarchal systems that came to be, there's often a deep memory of being so severely punished and killed if you step out of line, as it were. So this in turn can function in relationships between people and in marriages where people are so scared to really open themselves up sexually. There's so much fear. Vesta is a goddess that can correspond to very deep fears, as well as the principle of focus and the principle of commitment and the principle of centeredness. But there can be a lot of subconscious and unconscious fears, which may just speak to, previous lifetimes, previous memories that the soul has around these natural ways of being and living. And they were natural because back in those days, there was no such thing as marriage. There's a lot of material you can read about Vesta, which also talks about, there were times where certain kings were in ruling at the time, they would have, these Vestal virgins that they would have sexual encounters with, like, 6 or 7 of them, and it would be in the dark. Nobody would know who was sleeping with who. I know it sounds pretty weird because we're just not used to life in that way, but at some point we did live in that way as well, because if we are open to evolution and reincarnation, then it must go without saying that we have had so many experiences, right, through the course of our evolution. So we all have memories as well of being totally free and living under natural laws, which is connected to the matriarch, where nobody belonged to anybody. And the opposite to that, that's been created through the Libran archetype and the patriarchal systems, is that, well, you're in a relationship with me, therefore you're mine. You're nobody else's. You can't be anybody else's. You're mine. And if you step outside of that, then you've broken the law according to the vows that you offered, the law of the church and whatever else, right? And so, that you've now become a sinner. It's the ultimate sin, to cheat on your partner, right? And why do people cheat? There's many reasons. There's many psychological reasons that we could, sort of unpack on that level. But relative to Vesta and the repression that's occurred, and the subsequent inability for people to experience their sexuality in a whole way, and they just end up having aspects of that repressed or oppressed. And through that comes guilt when they think of anything or think of doing something or do something that's outside of the model that's been presented, which is, you just very simply, you grow up, you get married, you have children, that's your husband for life, or that's your wife for life, or whatever. We certainly know that that model is sort of moving further and further away from the reality of most people's lives. I'm not saying that those of you that do get married and stay with one partner and choose that life, that there's anything wrong with that. That's some people can do that, some people want to do that, and that's absolutely fine. But in truth, when we go back into what once existed, which was more natural for us, there was just no such thing. So some of these issues can come up very strongly when Vesta is being amplified in your chart, whether that's through a natal position or whether that's through some transit. So there can be a lot of material that can be healed and understood and worked through during this time. And especially if you're in a relationship and sexual intimacy, true, deep sexual intimacy is explored and experienced and embraced. For a lot of couples, it's not. There's a lot of suppression, a lot of fear and shame and judgment and all that sort of stuff that comes up. So it can be a powerful time for healing, even aspects to the soul's memory of past lives and how that may or may not be playing out in some kind of way in the current life, right? And also with Vesta transits, as I said, there's the process of recognizing where your energy has been dispersed externally for, certain situations or people to such a large extent. And now it's time to actually recharge yourself. That's another way of putting it. It's reintegrating, but it is recharging yourself, right? And also, I really like this comment here. Because Vesta is the principle of focus, she basically gathers energy and brings it to a simple point, which is what I was explaining before about that intense focus, right? And it is through that process that clarity and illumination unfolds for us, because of our ability to, focus at 100% on one particular thing. Just think about how scattered our energy can become because we are distracted by so many different things in the world, in our lives, on a daily basis. And, one of the largest contributions to that is technology and the internet. I've said this before, technology and the internet, it's such a curse, and also an incredible, powerful tool in so many ways as well. But it is depersonalizing life in so many ways. That the whole virtual world is taking over, right? And now it's escalating so rapidly at the moment, in ways that our brain can't even catch up to that. It's just so mind-boggling what the level that technology has reached to at this point in time. And whilst that can bring some positive things, it's also a great downfall in the experience of humanity from the point of view of personal contact and personal interaction, and also the ability to stay centered, which is Vesta's one of Vesta's primary core attributes, reminding us of our own centeredness, the center within us. So that hearth, that flame, that sacred flame, which was represented throughout Greece in many different ways. It was the centerpiece in people's homes. It was used in all sorts of ceremonies and events, and new sort of initiatory sort of things beginning, and contracts being sort of signed off. There was the whole sacred flame of Vesta was brought into the meaning of those sorts of experiences as well, to symbolize something very sacred and special, and something that was really focused on, basically. So yeah, that focus can give us greater clarity and illumination relative to whatever it is we are focused on, right? It's undivided attention to whatever you are doing, like I was saying before. On the other hand, because Vesta can also speak to our energy poured into work, for example, as in the work that we do, whether that's let's stay on the professional sort of side of things, and it doesn't matter what profession that is or whether it's considered a profession or not, but just the work that you do, right, to make money, survive, whatever. An out of balanced Vesta would be a person who's the workaholic, who works 80 hours a week and can't stop, and is just burning the candle at both ends. That's a very unbalanced Vesta, because it doesn't matter what we do in life, right? In terms of anything we do and anything we participate in, let me put it like this, there has to be a balance, right? So anything that we experience too much of or ingest too much of, we'll end up having, some sort of adverse reaction. It doesn't matter how good that thing is. Too much sleep will ultimately not be the greatest thing, just to give a simple example. Certainly too much wine will have an effect on your body. So it's just bringing back into that center, Vesta, focus, imbalances that may need to be addressed as well, especially if you're a workaholic. And I know of people in my life who are like that. And I know of one particular person who's in a relationship with another person at the moment, and she's a workaholic, and it's impacting in her life in very disastrous ways at the moment, because it's impacting on her mental and emotional well-being. Her mental and emotional well-being is under so much stress at the moment, and her own doctor, GP, said to her, you actually need to just change jobs. This is going to ruin your life. So that's just an example of somebody, who's doing the Vesta workaholic thing. So it can show up in those sorts of fields as well. I'd like to actually just bring up a chart. This is just the transits for today. So there is Vesta. Let me just get some. Okay, where are you? So there's Vesta, okay, in Virgo. 23 degrees, 51 minutes. She started her journey. Now, this I only realized this today, and it kind of blew my mind a bit. She started her journey in Virgo October 2020, and she completes her journey in Virgo this month, July. And so if we count that I think it was so November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July. It's about 9 months. And what's symbolized by 9 months? It's the term that a woman is pregnant, right? And so I really just love that little connection that I made in my own head, because I thought, well, that's got to be quite significant as well. There's something deep that's been sort of in a gestation period, if you like, within ourselves about our own life, right? Relative to Vesta things. And when she comes out of that period, which will be, well, I'll show you. Just need to. So, whoops, went a little bit too far there. So it's actually on the 20th of July. So by the 20th of July, Vesta will actually ingress into the sign of Libra. So yeah, it's just an interesting process to reflect on. I think what's been in gestation for you the last 9 months. What's been working on that inner level relative to Vesta things, and that could just be something that could, I mean, aside from the workaholic example that I gave, it can also be that you are working very hard towards something that you're trying to create and actualize in your life, and the Vesta principle and focus will be, the what's the word I'm thinking? Not necessarily advocate, will be I've just forgotten the word anyway, but she'll be the energy that you could tap into, or that you have been tapping into, that possibly speaks to that level of focus and commitment, dedication, devotion, focus, center are the sort of really powerful keywords for this goddess. And as I said before, the opposition to Neptune has been very much a journey that has highlighted where we have grown spiritually, some, further sort of understanding and illumination around that, and where indeed we may still need to do further integrative work on that spiritual level, Neptune, Pisces, in our daily life, Vesta in Virgo. And that journey is coming to a close right now, basically. As you can see, Vesta is still opposite Neptune, but that's the last time she's going to be opposite Neptune. Now, the other thing that I want to address is that she's, in a few days' time, she's going to form a trine to Pluto. And that's the other part of this picture as well, because that's not the first time she's actually going to form a trine to Pluto, okay? Because both Pluto and Neptune move incredibly slowly, right? And because Vesta has been retrograde in Virgo through this cycle of Virgo, she went retrograde in Virgo, and her journey in Virgo has been a 9-month period. And the major aspects relative to, I mean, she's formed other aspects to other things, of course, right? But I'm focusing, how's that for Vesta? I'm focusing today on the big guns, Neptune and Pluto, because Neptune is the frequency that assists us in our spiritual illumination, our spiritual connection, divine self, divine connection, source to all things, waking us up, inspiring us into love, the highest form of love, not that conditioned, I love you because you wash the dishes for me, but I love you because I just love you, because you are you, and I love you for you. And let me just remind you all, that's something that you need to say to yourself. I just put a post up a couple of hours ago, and I just simply said something like, let me just read it. No one is going to love you the way you need to love yourself. And that's nobody's fault. It is designed to be like this. Self-love at the highest vibration heals everything within and therefore without. So every morning when you wake up, remember this deep, infinite love, which is what you actually are, and give yourself a hug. Like literally give yourself a hug and hold that space for your beautiful heart, the essence of who and what you are. If we could do that every morning with conviction, it might feel awkward to start with, and you may not really believe it very much when you start doing it. It might feel weird. You might think, oh, this, what the hell am I doing? This is ridiculous. This is, is this narcissistic? Am I being, what am I doing? Well, it's not. It's actually a practice that leads to healing, that connects you further to your essence, more deeply to your essence, reminding you of who you are. The healthier and more integrated we are on the inner planes, the healthier our external world will appear. The crisis, the collective crisis that we are witnessing today, has many different components that could describe why and what and this and that. But one thing we could also say is that the severity of distortion and dysfunction with the inner feminine and masculine, and that goes, into, I'd like to say both genders, and then I'd like to say perhaps just all human beings, those fractured and distorted inner feminine and masculine components are what I think and believe are a large part of this collective drama that we are witnessing today. And that's okay, because it's got to come to crunch time, and it's got to come to crisis time for things to actually shift in the incredibly powerful ways that things are shifting at the moment. There's many layers to this, and there are many views and perspectives. I respect that and I understand that. And I'm just merely just touching on, you know, well, what I consider actually a huge factor, but it's just one part of the puzzle, right? But it's a huge one. And I think at the core, actually, not just at sort of some facet that's sort of just randomly coming through, as it were, but actually a very core, essential detail to the facts of what's unfolding as well. And, you know, I mean, Eris, where is she? There she is there. So let me just grab some. So, yeah, so there's Vesta opposite Neptune in Pisces. Vesta trine Pluto. Actually, let me just talk about that. So the trine to Pluto has been happening, you know, all year as well. And well, since it's probably been very, very close to the months of when Vesta has been opposite Neptune. It hasn't been too far off those times, because you can see that Neptune's 23 and Pluto's 25. Well, at the moment, it's almost 26, right? So anyway, they're not far away from each other. So it's a safe guess, right, to assume that the opposition to Neptune and the trine to Pluto have just kind of been side by side, as it were. And so the Pluto component, if we go to Pluto through the lens of evolutionary astrology, which speaks to the soul itself, which is immutable consciousness, basically meaning we are infinite, we are always evolving, and we can never be destroyed, but only change in form. Our ego and our body will be destroyed. That's evident in the journey and process of what we call life and death, as it were, right? Being born and then leaving the body. But the core essence of what you are is it's infinite, right? It's immutable consciousness. And the changing of the form is, first of all, the identity that we take on into this physical body. And of course, the various changes that occur throughout the course of one life. That's changing of form and experience. But Pluto forming a trine to Vesta, I think, has been a really powerful tool in allowing us and inviting us into really channeling that focus, that principle of commitment, devotion, focus, centeredness towards whatever it is we've focused it to, right? Vesta is Vesta. She symbolizes all the things that I've spoken about and much more. But depending on where she is in your chart, depending on who you are, depending on what you are focusing on, the experience is going to be completely different for all of us, right? So I can't say what it's going to be for 8.5 billion people. That's something that each of us needs to reflect on relative to our own personal journey. But certainly the trine from Pluto has been a very powerful point of soul integration, because both Vesta and Pluto correspond to the soul. Vesta takes us into the soul work that we will do if we so wish. And Pluto is the soul. And so here they are dancing together in earth signs. In a trine aspect means energies that flow together harmoniously without effort. And Pluto, of course, corresponds to transformation, doesn't it? And it's also death and rebirth. So there could be a lot of things that have happened in the last 9 months or so where we have let go of certain people or things out of our life, or we have completely transformed something in our life or a particular approach or some aspect of our lifestyle. Old structures, Capricorn. But I guess the integration here between Virgo to Capricorn relative to a trine aspect and relative to soul work, Vesta, Pluto, a lot of it has been activated through the physical body. That is our health, our well-being, Virgo, the spiritual work, Virgo, paying attention to nutrition, sleep, all those things, right? And what are we able to do in our everyday life that helps us with this deeper soul integration? So what are we able to do on that external level that could mirror that and reflect that? And it can be anything from yoga, meditation, chanting, mantras, walking, running, swimming. It can be any and all of those things. Lots of different sort of spiritual type practices or therapeutic work, Reiki healing. So there's so many different ways. Thank God we've got access to so much these days. We really have. And the access that we have on that external plane is merely something that facilitates actually what we already have within us anyway. But sometimes we need those external signposts, if you like, or supports or indicators that create a deeper integration into what we are working on, right? So yeah, just some things to think about. I was reflecting on all this probably the last week, and I've been observant of this Vesta Neptune through the whole cycle because I've been aware of it right from the start. And as I said, Vesta is so prominent in my chart, and transiting Vesta is trine Pluto for all of us. And in my own chart, transiting Vesta is trine my natal Pluto. So in other words, Vesta is being highly activated for me at the moment. And I'm still reflecting on the journey, and I have some clear indications of what's transpired through this journey. And I can feel there's more that's going to be experienced, embodied, and transpired and shown to me, particularly as Vesta moves closer towards forming an exact trine to Pluto, which is not far at all. Let me just clear. So if we just step that forward by days, let's just see what happens. Okay, so 5th of July, which is tomorrow, in Australia anyway, and for you guys it's a couple of days away, or you guys in the northern hemisphere I should say. So you can see she's 24 degrees 14 minutes. Now Pluto's retrograde, right? So the trine is, it's already kicked in. There's no question about that. But certainly as she gets closer and closer, so let's just go one more day. So 6th of July, 24:38, Pluto's 25:50. Okay, so now she's moved to the 25th degree. That's on the 7th of July. This is just before the new moon in Cancer, actually, which is quite interesting. Let's go one more day. You can see Vesta is still moving quite slow, right? That's because she's been retrograde. And so when a planet has been retrograde and it stops to change its direction, each planetary body has a different speed, whether it's moving direct or retrograde or stationary. But certainly when a body stops, its momentum takes a few days to pick up, right? So she's still moving quite slowly. So, okay, so it's basically around about here. So on the 9th of July, and this is in effect right now and has been in effect really the last 9 months. But this is the final trine that she's going to make to Pluto as well. So this is, this is really powerful stuff, guys. This is really, it should be very encouraging for you, for all of you, to just think about what's been happening the last 9 months and what, as I said, it's like it's a gestation period, right? 9 months. That's how long, right? A baby is inside its mother's womb, right? And so there's so much going on, though, isn't there? In that journey of being in the mother's womb, psychically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and the formation, growing and developing and evolving. And we can think about that just relative to the different journeys that we go through in our life. When we choose to do something, usually there's a thought that rises and some sort of inspiration, if you like, an idea, and that starts to generate the process that follows, right? So I really love this energy because to me it just speaks to soul, evolution, transformation, letting go of old storylines, paradigms, timelines, things that absolutely do not foster the right action moving forward for your soul's evolution. And Pluto's helping us do this with the trine to Vesta. It's not making it difficult. It's actually really supportive because it's a trine aspect. So there's some food for thought for all of you. I hope you found this interesting and I hope it speaks to you. Love to hear your comments and or questions relative to this topic and what I've shared today. And I will see you guys soon for the new moon in Cancer. Sending you all much love and see you soon. Bye.